Body Knows, Episode 14, Childhood Conditioning. Hello, and welcome back to The Body Knows. In this episode, we're diving into one of the deepest layers of our human experience, childhood conditioning. When we talk about behaviour, about nervous system responses, about trauma and memory, the roots nearly always trace back to childhood. This is where our nervous system is most malleable, most absorbent, and most dependent. It is also where we form the earliest scripts about what it means to be safe, loved, punished, excluded, or neglected. For better or worse, these first years of life wire the architecture of the brain and body. They set the stage for how we will interpret the world, how we will relate to others, and how we will even relate to ourselves. The nervous system's early imprints. In this first part of episode 14, I want to set out a map, how early environments sculpt the nervous system, why conditioning is not simply a psychological idea, but a biological fact, and how experiences of love, fear, neglect, or punishment become embodied patterns that we carry for decades. Along the way, we'll look at the science of brain development, the theories of attachment and learning, and the ways culture and family turn fleeting moments into lifelong imprints. The child's nervous system as clay. The first years of life are unlike any other period in human development. A child's brain is in a state of extraordinary plasticity. Neural connections form at lightning speed, up to 1 million new synapses per second in infancy. This overproduction is followed by pruning, where unused connections are cut back and frequently used pathways are reinforced. In essence, the child's environment selects which neural pathways will survive. If warmth and safety are consistent, the circuits of trust and calm are strengthened. If chaos and fear dominate, the circuits of hypervigilance and alarm grow stronger. Conditioning is not abstract, it is literally sculpting the neural architecture of the child's brain. The body is equally shaped. The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal (HPA) axis, which governs stress responses, calibrates itself in childhood. If stress is intermittent and recoverable, the system learns resilience. If stress is chronic, the system overlearns vigilance and underlearns recovery. The body begins to treat life as a constant emergency, even when the actual danger has long passed. This is the biological foundation of childhood conditioning. What children experience does not simply pass, it imprints. Attachment as the first script from birth. The child's survival depends on attachment. The caregiver's voice, touch, gaze, and presence are the first signals that teach the nervous system what safety feels like. When caregivers are consistent and attuned, the child's body learns, I can trust. I am safe. My needs will be met. This is the script of secure attachment. But when caregivers are inconsistent, neglectful, intrusive, or frightening, other scripts emerge. The child's nervous system adapts, but the adaptations come at a cost. Anxious attachment. The child's body learns hypervigilance to signs of rejection. The nervous system stays on edge, scanning for abandonment. Avoidant attachment. The child's body learns to suppress need. The nervous system downregulates outward signals of distress, appearing independent but carrying inner loneliness. Disorganized attachment. The child's body faces the impossible paradox of needing comfort from the very source of fear. The nervous system develops chaotic responses, approach, and avoidance intertwined. These attachment scripts are not intellectual. They are embodied patterns, encoded in heart rate variability, cortisol rhythms, and vagal tone. A raised eyebrow, a delayed response, a sharp tone, all of these become triggers because the child's body has been conditioned to expect abandonment or intrusion. Punishment, neglect, and the moral body conditioning is not only about attachment, it is also about how the child learns right and wrong. But here, moral learning is not just cognitive, it is somatic. When a child is punished harshly, the nervous system pairs fear with self-expression. The lesson becomes, to be myself is dangerous. When a child is neglected, the nervous system pairs silence with survival. The lesson becomes, my needs don't matter. Even rewards condition the body. Praise for compliance teaches the nervous system that masking one's true impulses is safer than honesty. This is why so many autistic children, for example, are praised for suppressing natural regulation, stillness, quietness, and smiling, even when inside their nervous systems are overwhelmed. The body carries the cost long after the praise fades. This is how the moral code of childhood is written, not in abstract principles, but in the visceral language of the nervous system. Tension, release, pain, relief. Every early experience contributes to the construction of what we call the self. If you were held warmly, you may come to see yourself as lovable. If you were constantly criticized, you may come to see yourself as inadequate. The crucial point is that these are not simply beliefs, they are embodied states. You don't just think you are inadequate. Your stomach knots, your chest tightens, your voice falters. The nervous system has a paired identity with physiology. This is why childhood conditioning is so hard to unpick. It isn't just in your head, it's in your body. The philosophical question, freedom or conditioning. Childhood conditioning raises an ancient question. Are we free or are we determined? On one hand, neuroscience shows us how powerfully early environments sculpt us. By age 7, many neural pathways are already set. On the other hand, human history is full of stories of resilience of people breaking free from early scripts, reinventing themselves, or transforming their lives. Perhaps the truth lies in between. Childhood conditioning sets the stage, but it does not write the whole play. It gives us embodied scripts, but with awareness and effort, we can improvise new lines. The nervous system is plastic not only in childhood, but across life. Healing is possible. Personal reflection, my own early imprints. For me, childhood conditioning was a mixed inheritance. There were moments of warmth, yes, but also long stretches of silence, neglect, and invalidation. I remember times when my nervous system collapsed under the weight of unmet needs. I became hyper-aware of tones of voice, quick to read the room, constantly scanning for tension. These were not quirks of personality. They were survival strategies. My body had been conditioned to detect danger early because danger had been real. At the same time, my meltdowns, my anger, my shutdowns were read as bad behaviour rather than desperate attempts to cope. This conditioned me further, not only to feel unsafe, but to mistrust my own signals. I was punished for what was, in truth, my body's best attempt to survive. Looking back, I see how deeply those early environments wired my nervous system. Even as an adult, a harsh tone can collapse me into silence or ignite anger. Even now, the body carries the scripts of then. Why this matters understanding childhood conditioning matters, because it frees us from shame. Too often, adults blame themselves for their struggles. Why am I so anxious? Why can't I trust? Why do I collapse in conflict? The answer is not weakness, it is conditioning. Your nervous system was wired in a specific environment, and it learned lessons that once kept you alive. The challenge now is not to blame yourself, but to recognize the script and begin to rewrite it. This is what we'll explore in the rest of this episode. From attachment styles to punishment and neglect, from classrooms to neurodivergence, from philosophy to personal reflection, we'll map how childhood conditioning shapes us and how awareness can help us transform it. Because the body remembers, and the body knows. Let's begin attachment styles as embodied scripts. When we talk about attachment, it's easy to imagine a neat psychological category: secure, anxious, avoidant, disorganized. But these are not just labels in a textbook. They are living, breathing scripts written into the nervous system from the very beginning of life. Attachment is the first classroom, the first mirror, the first rehearsal of what relationships will feel like. And it is written not in words but in sensation: a heartbeat that slows when held, a stomach that tightens when ignored, a throat that closes when a cry is met with anger instead of care. To understand attachment, we have to begin with the body. Because long before a child can articulate beliefs about self and other, the body has already answered the deepest questions. Am I safe? Can I trust? Do my signals matter? Am I lovable? Secure attachment. The nervous system learns safety. In the ideal case, a caregiver responds with enough consistency, warmth, and attunement that the child's nervous system learns to expect safety. This doesn't mean perfect parenting. No one can meet a child's needs every single time. What matters is good enough caregiving, as Donald Winnicott called it. In secure attachment, the child's nervous system calibrates to trust. The amygdala, which scans for danger, is soothed by the caregiver's voice, touch, and gaze. The hippocampus, which sequences events, learns a predictable rhythm. Need leads to signal, signal leads to response, response leads to relief. The vagus nerve develops flexible tone, shifting easily between activation and calm. The embodied script becomes: when I reach, I am met. When I cry, I am soothed. When I explore, I am supported. When I fail, I am comforted. Children who grow up with secure attachment carry this into adulthood. Their nervous systems tend to return to baseline more easily after stress. They feel safe in intimacy, comfortable with closeness, and resilient in conflict. But for many, secure attachment is not the story. Anxious attachment. The nervous system learns hypervigilance. When caregivers are inconsistent, sometimes attentive, sometimes distracted, sometimes available, sometimes absent, the child's nervous system adapts by amplifying its signals. If love is unpredictable, better to cling tightly, to protest loudly, to stay hyper-attuned to every shift. The amygdala becomes overactive, scanning for rejection. Cortisol levels spike more easily, and recovery takes longer. The hippocampus struggles to sequence events into a calm narrative because safety was not reliably restored. The embodied script becomes: I must cling. I must protest. If I don't make my needs known loudly, I will be abandoned. Love is fragile. I am too much, but I must keep trying. In adulthood, this plays out as anxious attachment, fear of abandonment, sensitivity to shifts in tone, preoccupation with whether the other still cares. A partner not replying to a message feels like a catastrophic rejection. A small withdrawal feels like the end. This is not irrational. It is the nervous system reliving the early truth. Sometimes I was held, sometimes I wasn't, and so I must never stop scanning. Avoidant attachment. The nervous system learns suppression. When caregivers consistently reject, dismiss, or fail to respond to signals, the child's nervous system adapts in the opposite way. If crying, reaching, or needing brings no relief or worse, brings scolding, then the safest path is to shut it down. The amygdala learns to suppress outward protest, even if inner stress remains. The vagus nerve may lean toward dorsal vagal shutdown, a kind of numb stillness. Oxytocin pathways, which fuel bonding, may be underused. The embodied script becomes, my needs don't matter. It's safer not to show them. Independence is survival. To rely on others is dangerous. In adulthood, this manifests as avoidant attachment. Intimacy feels suffocating. Independence is prized above closeness. Partners may complain that the avoidantly attached person is distant, cold, or emotionally unavailable. But beneath a calm exterior often lies a body carrying loneliness and fear. Avoidance is not lack of feeling. It is feeling too much and learning to bury it deep. Disorganized attachment. The nervous system learns chaos. Perhaps the most painful script is disorganized attachment. This arises when caregivers are both the source of comfort and the source of fear. A child raised in an environment of abuse, neglect, or frightening inconsistency faces an impossible paradox. I need you, but you scare me. I must move toward you, but I must also retreat. The nervous system becomes chaotic. The amygdala fires constantly. The vagus nerve oscillates between fight-flight activation and freeze. Cortisol floods the system, and recovery is impaired. The hippocampus struggles to make coherent memory because the sequence is incoherent. Comfort and threat collapse into one. The embodied script becomes love is danger, safety is betrayal, trust is impossible, I'm unworthy. As adults, disorganized attachment often manifests as alternating between clinging and avoidance, craving intimacy and fearing it, moving toward partners then pushing them away. Relationships feel like battlegrounds because the body carries both longing and terror. Attachment is embodied, not chosen. What is crucial to remember is that attachment styles are not choices. They are not moral failings. They are adaptations, the nervous system's best attempt to survive a specific environment. Anxious attachment is not needy. It is survival in the face of inconsistency. Avoidant attachment is not cold. It is survival in the face of rejection. Disorganized attachment is not dramatic. It is survival in the face of paradox. These styles are embodied scripts written long before the child could consciously choose. The classroom of the nervous system. We often think children learn through explicit teaching, through words and instructions. But attachment shows us that the deepest lessons are taught through bodies. A mother's soothing voice teaches calm. A father's consistent presence teaches trust. A caregiver's sharp tone teaches fear. These lessons bypass conscious thought. They are etched into cortisol rhythms, heart rate variability, and vagal tone. By the time a child enters school, much of their relational script is already written, not in their mind, but in their body. Philosophical and cultural perspectives, philosophers and anthropologists remind us that attachment is not universal in form. In some cultures, infants are carried constantly, sleeping beside their parents, rarely left alone. In others, independence is emphasized from early infancy, with babies placed in separate rooms or encouraged to self-soothe. These cultural practices shape the nervous system. In cultures of co-sleeping and constant touch, secure attachment may be reinforced through embodied closeness. In cultures of independence, avoidant attachment may be more common, as children learn early that signals will not always be answered. Philosophically, this raises questions. Is attachment style destiny, or is it culture? Is independence truly a virtue, or is it a collective avoidance script? Is hypervigilance pathology, or is it wisdom in a dangerous environment? These questions matter because they remind us that attachment is not just individual. It is also cultural conditioning shaping generations. Personal reflection, my own scripts looking back, I can see my own nervous system shaped by attachment scripts. There were moments of comfort, yes, but also long silences, invalidation, and inconsistency. At times, I felt the anxious pull, desperate to be seen, quick to scan for signs of rejection, fearful that silence meant abandonment. At other times, I retreated into avoidance, suppressing needs, pretending I was fine, telling myself independence was strength. And at my lowest, I felt the disorganized chaos, pulled between craving connection and fearing it, longing to be held but bracing for hurt. These weren't choices. They were scripts my nervous system learned before I even understood the word attachment. They shaped my relationships, my sense of self, my entire way of being in the world. Why naming matters, naming attachment styles matters, because it transforms shame into understanding. Instead of saying, I'm too needy, you can say, my body learned anxious vigilance. Instead of saying, I'm cold, you can say, my body learned to avoid it. Instead of saying, I'm chaotic, you can say, my body learned disorganization. This doesn't excuse harmful behavior, but it contextualizes it. It reframes attachment styles as survival strategies, not moral flaws. And with awareness comes choice. Because while attachment scripts are powerful, they are not final. The nervous system is plastic. Healing is possible. But the first step is recognizing the script. Attachment is not simply a theory. It is the nervous system's first language, written in tone, touch, and timing. It is the foundation of childhood conditioning, shaping how we love, trust, and fear. To understand attachment is to understand that our bodies are not broken, they are adaptive. They carry the stories of how we were met, or not met, in the earliest moments of life. And this is why healing is both possible and profound. Because if the body learned once, it can learn again. The scripts may be powerful, but they are not unchangeable. The nervous system is capable of rewriting. In the next part, we'll explore another dimension of childhood conditioning, how punishment, neglect, and reward create embodied moral codes, teaching children not just who they are, but what behaviour is allowed, suppressed, or punished in the body. Because the lessons of childhood are not only about love, they are also about power, punishment, neglect, and the body's moral code. When we speak of morality, the word usually conjures images of commandments, school rules, or philosophical debates about what it means to be good. But before a child ever hears the word morality, their body has already been taught what is safe and what is dangerous, what is acceptable and what is forbidden. The earliest moral lessons are not abstract. They are visceral. They are written in cortisol surges, in heartbeats that quicken under a parent's glare, in tears that dry unanswered, in the sudden calm that comes when a smile of approval is finally given. For children, the body is the textbook, and punishment, neglect, and reward are the ink. Punishment. Fear as moral teacher. Punishment is one of the oldest tools of conditioning. It teaches by pairing pain or fear with a behaviour until the child learns to suppress it. On the surface, punishment appears simple. The child touches something forbidden, and they are scolded or smacked. They learn not to repeat it. But beneath the surface, the nervous system is doing far more than learning rules. When punishment arrives, the amygdala ignites. The body perceives danger, even when the danger is a parent's voice or hand. Cortisol surges, heart rate spikes, muscles tense. The hippocampus, which sequences memory, records not just the behaviour but the flood of sensations. When I acted this way, fear followed. Over time, these pairings create embodied scripts. A child who is punished for speaking up may learn that expression is dangerous. A child punished for crying may learn that vulnerability leads to pain. A child punished inconsistently, sometimes harshly, sometimes not at all, may live in constant vigilance, never knowing when the next blow will come. The moral lesson becomes tangled. It is not this act is wrong. It is I am wrong when I express myself. The nervous system does not differentiate between the deed and the self. The child's identity fuses with their fear. Neglect. Silence as moral teacher. Neglect is often more insidious than punishment, but its lessons are just as enduring. When a child cries and no one comes, the nervous system learns that signals do not matter. When a child's needs are ignored, the body learns that existence itself is unworthy of attention. In neglect, the body does not ignite in fiery alarm, as with punishment. Instead, it collapses. The vagus nerve leans into dorsal shutdown. Energy drains, muscles slacken. Dissociation whispers, why bother? No one is listening anyway. The moral code written here is one of invisibility. It teaches the child that to need is to fail, that to hope is to hurt, that silence is safer than speech. And just as punishment fuses morality with fear, neglect fuses morality with absence. The child learns not, I did something wrong, but I am not worth noticing. Praise and reward, compliance as moral teacher, while punishment and neglect teach through fear and silence, reward and praise shape morality in subtler ways. When a child is praised for compliance, for sitting still, for smiling on cue, for suppressing impulses, the nervous system pairs approval with masking. The dopamine system lights up, relief and joy flood the body, and so the child learns, my true impulses are risky. My mask is lovable. This is especially pronounced for neurodivergent children. An autistic child who stimulates regulation may be told to stop fidgeting and rewarded when they comply. An ADHD child whose body craves movement may be praised for staying unnaturally still. On the outside, the behaviour looks good. On the inside, the nervous system is straining. The reward is teaching suppression, not authenticity. The moral lesson becomes, to be good is to betray myself. To be loved is to perform, not to be. The moral body in action together, punishment, neglect, and reward create what I call the moral body. It is not a list of rules. It is a web of sensations that dictate what feels safe, what feels dangerous, what feels lovable, and what feels shameful. The stomachache before speaking in class, the frozen throat when trying to express emotion, the sudden heat of shame when laughing too loudly, the relief when approval arrives, even at the cost of authenticity. These are the nervous system's moral codes. They guide behaviour long after childhood, often without awareness. Scenario: the raised hand in class. Imagine a child in school who knows the answer to a question. Their hand shoots up, but the teacher frowns, impatient, and snaps, not now. In that moment, the child's nervous system floods. The amygdala fires, danger. The vagus nerve dips, freeze. The hippocampus stores the sequence. Expression leads to rejection. Rejection leads to shame. Next time, the hand might rise slower. Eventually, it may not rise at all. The child learns the moral lesson. Don't speak unless you are certain. Don't risk rejection. Don't take up space. The adult this child becomes may struggle to voice ideas in meetings, to assert needs in relationships, to trust their own voice. The punishment of a single scolding becomes the seed of a lifelong script. Philosophy. Morality as embodied, not abstract philosophers have long debated the nature of morality. Is it divine command, rational principle, social contract? But attachment and conditioning show us that morality begins long before abstraction. It begins in the body. David Hume argued that morality is rooted in sentiment, in feelings of approval and disapproval. Modern neuroscience confirms this. Morality is not primarily about reasoning, but about embodied responses. Jonathan Haidt, a contemporary psychologist, describes moral judgments as like taste buds, quick, intuitive, and emotional, with reason often arriving later to justify what the body already felt. Seen this way, childhood conditioning is moral education at its most primal. Punishment, neglect, and reward shape the moral sentiments that guide future reasoning. Before a child learns Kant's categorical imperative, their body has already learned that anger is dangerous, or that silence is safe, or that smiling earns love. Cultural variations. The many moral bodies, different cultures condition children differently, and so the moral body takes different forms. In some collectivist cultures, compliance and respect for elders are praised, while individuality is discouraged. The moral body learns that harmony and obedience equal safety, while self-expression risks shame. In more individualist cultures, independence and assertiveness may be praised, while dependency is shamed. The moral body learns that to need is weakness, while autonomy equals worth. Neither system is neutral. Both shapes embodied scripts that ripple into adulthood, and both remind us that morality is not universal. It is conditioned through the nervous systems of children raised in specific cultural environments. Personal reflection, my double punishment. In my own childhood, I often felt the weight of double punishment. When I melted down under emotional stress, when anger or frustration burst through after too much suppression, adults saw only the outburst. They forgot the hours, days, or weeks of calm compliance that preceded it. I was punished twice. First by my own body, which could no longer hold the tension, and second by the adults who labelled my meltdown as bad behaviour. No one saw the nervous system stretched to breaking. No one recognised the survival strategy beneath the storm. The moral lesson I internalised was brutal. Even when I try to be good, I will still be seen as bad. Even when I hold myself together, only my collapse will be remembered. That lesson lingered into adulthood. It shaped how I judged myself, how I feared others' perceptions, how I mistrusted my own signals. It was not just a memory. It was an embodied script. The cost of early moral codes. The moral body, shaped by punishment, neglect, and reward, does its job. It keeps the child safe in a dangerous or inconsistent environment. But the cost is high. Creativity shrinks. Authenticity withers. Trust becomes fragile. Self-worth becomes conditional. As adults, we may feel the cost without knowing its origin. Why do I always fear disapproval? Why do I collapse in conflict? Why do I smile when I want to scream? The answer lies in the body. These are not flaws of will. They are moral codes written before we had a choice. Breaking the moral body's grip. The hopeful truth is that while these codes are powerful, they are not final. The nervous system is plastic. The moral body can be rewritten. Therapeutic practices, somatic experiencing, inner child work, and trauma-informed therapy all aim to bring awareness to these embodied scripts. The work is not about erasing memory, but about giving the body new experiences. Moments of expression met with care, needs met without punishment, authenticity met with love. Over time, these new pairings can reshape the moral body. The stomachache before speaking can soften. The frozen throat can loosen. The relief of authenticity can replace the relief of masking. Punishment, neglect, and reward do more than shape behavior. They shape the moral body. They teach us what is safe, what is dangerous, what is lovable, and what is shameful, not in abstract terms, but in embodied sensation. To recognize this is to free ourselves from self-blame, because the truth is this: if you struggle with shame, if you collapse in conflict, if you fear expression, it is not because you are weak. It is because your body was taught those lessons early. And if the body learned once, it can learn again. In the next part, we'll explore how these lessons play out in one of the most formative arenas of childhood, the classroom. Because schools are not only places of learning. They are stages where early conditioning is repeated, reinforced, and sometimes painfully reenacted. The classroom is a mirror of home. The classroom is never neutral. It might appear as rows of desks, a blackboard, exercise books, and a teacher at the front. But beneath the surface, it is a charged space. It is where authority meets vulnerability, where approval and shame are handed out daily, and where the nervous system's early conditioning is tested and reinforced. Every child who enters that space brings with them the imprint of home. Some arrive carrying the security of consistent love, their nervous systems primed to explore, learn, and trust. Others arrive carrying the scripts of neglect, punishment, or chaos, and for them, the classroom is not a place of discovery but of survival. For the teacher, 30 faces may look like a single group to manage. But for each child, the classroom is another mirror of what they already know about relationships, safety, and self-worth. In this mirror, old lessons echo, sometimes with devastating clarity. The teacher's voice as parental echo. Imagine a child sitting at a desk. The classroom is buzzing with chatter, the scrape of chairs, the flicker of fluorescent lights. The teacher suddenly raises their voice. Quiet down. For one child, this is a simple instruction. Their nervous system absorbs the tone, registers the authority, and settles into compliance. But for another child, the voice is not neutral. It is an echo. That harsh tone mirrors the parental anger they knew at home. Their amygdala surges, cortisol floods their bloodstream, and their vagus nerve drops them into freeze. What for another student is an ordinary moment of discipline is for this child a reenactment of fear. The classroom becomes the stage for parental ghosts. The body does not know this is a different adult, a different space. To the nervous system, it is the same story. Authority equals danger. Reward and shame in school conditioning schools, almost universally, rely on systems of reward and punishment. Gold stars, smiley charts, praise in front of the class, or on the other side, detention, loss of privileges, public reprimand. These methods shape not only behaviour, but the moral body of the child. When a child is praised for sitting still, they learn compliance equals safety. When they are scolded for fidgeting, they learn that regulation strategies like stimming or movement are forbidden. When they are humiliated for getting an answer wrong, they learn that curiosity and risk-taking are dangerous. In effect, schools continue the conditioning of home. They teach which impulses are rewarded, which are punished, and which are ignored. And because the classroom is public, these lessons are magnified. A reprimand at home may sting, but a reprimand in front of peers carries the added weight of shame. The nervous system absorbs these experiences deeply. A racing heart before raising a hand, a stomachache before presenting, a frozen throat when called on, these are not quirks. They are embodied scripts written through repeated pairings of expression with fear, compliance with relief. Scenario, the harsh tone of authority. Let's ground this in a scenario. A teacher addresses the class and one child is singled out. Stop talking at the back. The tone is sharp, the eyes are piercing. Step by step, the child's nervous system responds. 1. Startle response. The sudden tone triggers the brainstem reflex, heart rate spikes, shoulders jolt, pupils widen. 2. Amygdala activation. The alarm system fires, perceiving the teacher's voice as a threat. 3. Cortisol surge. Stress hormones flood the body, preparing for fight or flight. 4. Vagal collapse. With no safe escape, the vagus nerve tips toward freezing. The child goes still, silent, perhaps red in the face. 5. Encoding. The hippocampus binds this moment into memory. Expression leads to reprimand. Reprimand then leads to shame. To the outside observer, the child looks like they've learned their lesson. They stop talking. Order is restored. But beneath the surface, the nervous system has written another script. Authority equals humiliation. My voice is dangerous. My presence is risky. Years later, this same script may surface in a work meeting, a romantic conflict, or a political confrontation. The child is now an adult, but the body has never forgotten. Peer dynamics, the silent curriculum. The classroom is not only a space of authority, but also of peers. Children learn quickly that acceptance and exclusion are currencies as powerful as grades. When a group laughs at one child's mistake, the nervous system encodes shame. When a child is left out of games, their vagus nerve collapses into loneliness. When whispers spread behind someone's back, the amygdala learns vigilance. Peer conditioning is often silent, but its lessons are fierce. Fit in or be humiliated, mask difference or be mocked, stay invisible or be attacked. For children who are already carrying scripts of insecurity from home, these peer dynamics confirm their fears. The classroom becomes not a place of learning, but a crucible of survival. Neurodivergence in the classroom. For autistic and ADHD children, the classroom is often a battlefield of sensory and social overload. Autistic children may find the lights too bright, the noise too loud, the transitions too abrupt. When they stim to regulate, rocking, tapping, and humming, they may be told to stop. When they mask to survive, they are praised. Inside, their nervous system is burning with effort. Outside, they are labelled good. ADHD children may struggle to sit still for hours, their bodies craving movement. When they fidget, they are scolded. When they suppress their energy, they are rewarded. The nervous system learns not regulation, but repression. In both cases, the moral lesson is the same. Your natural body is wrong. To be good is to be someone else. The cost is enormous. Anxiety, depression, burnout, and dissociation often follow. What looks like compliance often collapses. Not all classrooms are the same way. In some cultures, group harmony is prioritized, and public correction is seen as teaching respect. In others, individuality is encouraged, and questioning authority is praised. But in every context, the nervous system is learning. A Japanese child may internalize the script, "Don't stand out, harmony is safety." An American child may internalize, "Speak up, silence is weakness." These cultural scripts shape generations, influencing not only individuals but entire societies. The way classrooms handle authority, mistakes, and differences is not just pedagogy. It is conditioning for citizenship, for conformity, or for resistance. Philosophical reflections, education as power. The philosopher Michel Foucault argued that schools are not simply places of learning, but institutions of discipline. Rows of desks, timed bells, report cards, surveillance. These are technologies of control, teaching children to regulate themselves under watchful eyes. From a Foucauldian perspective, the classroom is less about knowledge and more about producing compliant bodies. To sit still, to obey, to internalize authority, these are the real lessons. And for children whose nervous systems are already primed by fear, neglect, or hypervigilance, the classroom cements their scripts. Other philosophers, like Paulo Freire, called for liberatory education, classrooms that honor curiosity, dialogue, and empowerment. Freire warned that when children are treated as empty vessels to be filled, their autonomy is crushed. True education, he argued, must awaken critical consciousness, not reinforce obedience. Between Foucault and Freire, we see the stark choice. Will classrooms mirror the scripts of domination, or will they offer new scripts of freedom? Personal reflection, my classroom scripts. When I think back to my own classrooms, I remember the tension in my body more than the lessons on the board. The harsh tone of authority figures often echoed what I had already known at home. Invalidation, dismissal, fear. There were times when my nervous system collapsed into silence, even when I knew the answer. Other times, the pressure boiled over into frustration, which was quickly labelled as defiance. I also remember watching how peers treated each other, the whispers, the exclusions, the laughter at mistakes. I knew instinctively that stepping too far out of line would make me a target. So I masked, I withdrew, I tried to fit into roles that were not mine. The classroom for me was not a neutral space of learning. It was another mirror, reflecting the scripts of survival I had already carried. The hidden curriculum educators often speak of the hidden curriculum, the lessons that are not in textbooks but are nevertheless learned: punctuality, obedience, competition, conformity. But the deeper hidden curriculum is somatic. It is the nervous system's conditioning in real time. Every glare, every silence, every laugh, every reprimand, these are lessons the body absorbs. The child learns not only maths and reading, but also, my voice matters, my voice is dangerous. My body is welcome, my body is too much. Authority is safe, authority is humiliating. These lessons last far longer than the content of any exam. They shape how we relate to bosses, partners, governments, and even to ourselves. The classroom is never neutral. It is a mirror, reflecting back the scripts written at home, reinforcing them through authority, peers, and performance. For some children, this mirror confirms security. For others, it magnifies fear. For neurodivergent children, it often distorts them into roles they were never meant to play. To see the classroom this way is not to condemn education, but to understand its power. Because if schools can reinforce scripts of fear and suppression, they can also create scripts of empowerment and trust. The question is whether we are willing to see the body as the first learner, the nervous system as the first student. In the next part, we'll turn to those who experience conditioning most intensely, neurodivergent children. We'll explore how autism and ADHD reveal the hidden costs of childhood conditioning and how their heightened sensitivity sheds light on truths that neurotypical systems often ignore. Because sometimes, those most dismissed as different are the ones showing us the clearest reflection of what conditioning really does. Neurodivergence as case study. We're now stepping into a subject that is both profoundly personal and widely misunderstood: neurodivergence. For many, words like autism, ADHD, or bipolar come loaded with images, assumptions, and stereotypes. They are often treated as disorders, as pathologies, as deficits to be corrected. But what if these labels don't capture the whole picture? What if, instead of being broken, neurodivergent nervous systems are amplifiers, showing us truths about how conditioning, trauma, and environment shape all of us? This part of the series is personal for me. I've walked this path myself. Diagnosed late in life with autism, ADHD, and bipolar type 2, I know both the relief and the burden of those labels. I know the exhaustion of masking, the shame of being misunderstood, and the search for answers that don't quite land. But I also know the peace that comes from self-validation, from realizing that labels are not the end of the story. We'll explore neurodivergence as a case study in childhood conditioning. We'll look at the science of sensitivity, the cost of masking, the politics of labels, the possibility of reframing difference, and what neurodivergence reveals about the society we live in. Different from the start. For as long as I can remember, I felt different. As a child, I noticed things others didn't: the flicker of a fluorescent light, the uneven rhythm of a teacher's breathing, the way tension moved through a room before anyone spoke a word. My body picked up on signals and sensations constantly, but without a framework, I had no way of making sense of them. At my first school, I didn't want to go to school, at times because of it, and I could never explain why. It was purely based on a feeling. I now reflect the feeling was being unsafe. Sometimes the overwhelm became too much. I would shut down, go silent, or retreat into myself. Other times, the pressure built until it burst into meltdowns of anger and frustration. To adults, these moments looked like defiance, bad behaviour, temper. To me, they felt like survival. My nervous system stretched too far, forced to release what it could no longer hold. Even selective mutism shaped parts of my early life. When the emotional load grew unbearable, words would vanish. People pressed me to explain what was wrong, but I literally couldn't. The harder they pushed, the more painful it became. My body wasn't choosing silence. It was trapped in it. These weren't isolated quirks. They were the nervous system in action. Fight, flight, freeze, fawn survival responses hardwired into every human. For me, those responses arrived more quickly, lasted longer, and left deeper imprints. Looking back, I can see how misinterpretation piled on top of misinterpretation. My silence was seen as stubbornness or being shy. My anger was seen as rebellion. My overwhelm was seen as weakness. Rarely was it seen for what it truly was, a body doing its best to cope with a world that felt too much. The search for answers. As I grew older, the feeling of difference didn't disappear, it deepened. While others seemed to glide through social interactions, I felt like I was always working twice as hard, scanning for cues, managing energy, trying not to be too much. Eventually, I sought help. The NHS offered some support. Later, as a student in psychology at Derby University, who had a specialist autism study program being undertaken through the university, I was offered a private assessments at no cost. At age 36, I was formally diagnosed with comorbid conditions, bipolar type 2 autism and ADHD. Two separate practices confirmed it. In some ways, the diagnosis was a relief. It gave language to lifelong struggles. It validated what I had always known but couldn't articulate. It explained why my moods cycled, why attention felt slippery, why sensory input sometimes overwhelmed me. But the relief didn't last. I hoped others would finally understand, would accept me more, would treat me differently. But they didn't. People continued to assume choice, to judge behaviour, to dismiss struggles as attitude. The labels changed nothing in the eyes of others. And over time, I realised that the labels also changed little for me. They described but didn't heal. They categorised but didn't bring peace. I began to see that what I was really searching for was not diagnosis, but validation. And that validation couldn't come from outside. It had to come from within. The science of sensitivity to understand neurodivergence, we need to look beneath the labels to the body. What is actually happening in the nervous system? Autism often involves hyperresponsiveness across sensory cortices. Lights are brighter, sounds louder, textures sharper. The thalamus, which normally filters sensory input, lets more through. The amygdala, already larger in childhood, fires more readily. The result is a nervous system constantly flooded with input. Overload comes not from weakness, but from intensity. ADHD reflects differences in dopaminergic regulation. Novelty, movement, and stimulation become necessary to maintain focus. Sitting still in a classroom is not laziness but torture. The nervous system craves motion to balance itself. Without it, attention collapses. Bipolar disorder involves shifts in mood and energy, tied to oscillations in neural networks regulating reward, emotion, and executive function. The highs are not just happiness, but full body acceleration. The lows are not just sadness, but nervous system collapse. What all three reveal is that neurodivergence is not imaginary, it is embodied. The body truly processes the world differently. And when childhood conditioning collides with these sensitivities, the scripts run deeper, the wounds cut sharper, and the search for regulation becomes lifelong. The mask and its cost. One of the most common survival strategies among autistic children is masking. They learn to suppress stimming, to force eye contact, to mimic social cues. When they do, they are praised. Teachers call them well-behaved. Parents say they are finally fitting in. But inside, the cost is immense. The nervous system is burning energy to hold back authentic regulation. Cortisol surges, executive function overloads, dissociation whispers. The child learns that to be loved is to betray themselves. For ADHD children, masking takes a different form. They force stillness, hold back words, suppress impulses. They are rewarded for being statues when their bodies long to move. Over time, they internalize the lesson. My natural self is wrong. My energy is unacceptable. The long-term result is burnout, depression, anxiety, and sometimes even physical illness. The mask may win praise, but it erodes authenticity. Labels, power, and pathologizing human nature. Here's where the critique begins. Are these labels, autism, ADHD, bipolar, truly descriptions of broken systems? Or are they cultural tools that pathologize difference? I've come to believe the latter. Mental health is not separate from the environment. It is shaped by toxic foods, relentless pressure to conform, overstimulation, indoctrination. Each year, more children are diagnosed not because their brains are breaking spontaneously, but because the systems around them are making them sick. The story of Hans Asperger underlines this. He wasn't just a scientist, he collaborated with the Nazi regime. His very name tied to autism and Asperger's, the only difference in former diagnosis, as I believe Asperger's and autism are now, both categorized under the label of autism spectrum disorder. ASD was the child's ability to be verbal or nonverbal in diagnostic criteria. For decades, carries shadows. In some languages, Asperger evokes serpentine imagery. To me, this is not a coincidence. It feels like projection, another subtle manipulation in a long history of control. Thinkers like Michel Foucault warned us, psychiatry is not neutral. It defines who is normal and who is deviant, who is included and who is excluded. Thomas Szasz went further, calling mental illness a myth, a way of labeling behaviours society doesn't tolerate. Whether or not you accept these critiques fully, one truth is clear. Diagnosis carries power. It conditions not only children, but whole societies. And in many ways it blinds us to the deeper truth. These struggles are not purely individual. They are systemic, spiritual awakening and reframing difference. For me, healing didn't come from labels. It came from a spiritual awakening. I realized that difference is not a deficiency, that my sensitivity was not a curse but a signal, that the nervous system's collapse was not a personal failure but a response to trauma and overload. I also saw that seeking external validation was endless. No label, no diagnosis, no approval could give peace. The only validation that mattered was my own. Through this shift, I discovered something else: mirror neurons. When I act with self-compassion, others feel it. When I heal, those I connect with are given permission to heal too. My journey is not just mine, it radiates outward. Spiritual traditions echo this. Buddhism teaches that suffering, when met with compassion, becomes the seed of wisdom. Indigenous cultures often honor those who perceive differently as seers, healers, visionaries. Mystical traditions see sensitivity as a doorway to connection with the unseen. What psychiatry pathologizes, spirituality can reframe as gift, neurodivergence as mirror for society. And here's perhaps the most important point. Neurodivergence is not just about those who carry the labels. It is a mirror for us all. Autistic sensitivity reveals the violence of modern environments, the lights, the noise, the speed, that overwhelm all of us, though some feel it more intensely. ADHD restlessness exposes the absurdity of forcing children to sit still for hours, as though stillness is virtue and movement is sin. Bipolar intensity shows the depth of emotions that society tries to suppress, joy flattened, grief hidden, passion tamed. Neurodivergence doesn't break the human story. It illuminates it. It shows us what we all endure, only louder, sharper, harder to ignore. Personal reflection. From labels to liberation, I used to believe that diagnosis would bring acceptance, that others would understand me once I had a name for my struggles. But it didn't happen. People continued to judge. Some still believed I was choosing, exaggerating, or failing. The turning point came when I stopped seeking their validation. When I realized that I know my heart, I know my intentions, I know I am trying. That is enough. If some think I'm bad, they are entitled to it. If some think I'm good, likewise. But I no longer need to bend myself into their truth. My own truth is sufficient. This is liberation. Not from difference, that remains. Not from struggle, that continues. But from the prison of external judgment. So what is neurodivergence really? It is not disorder. It is difference. It is sensitivity amplified, survival strategies magnified, trauma loops exposed. It is also mirror, showing all of us the cost of conditioning, the violence of environments, the need for compassion. For those who carry the labels, healing is not found in the label itself, but in self-validation, in compassion, in rehumanization. For society, healing begins when we stop pathologizing difference and start listening to what these amplified nervous systems are telling us, because the body knows. And sometimes the most sensitive bodies are the ones carrying the clearest messages, cultural and philosophical perspectives. When we talk about childhood conditioning, it is easy to think of it as a purely private story, a parent's tone, a teacher's rule, a family's rhythms. But conditioning is never just personal. It is cultural, it is philosophical. Every society, consciously or not, writes its children into scripts that will shape how they see themselves and others. To step back and see this bigger picture is to realize that conditioning is not only about individual wounds, it is about cultural choices, systems of power, and worldviews that stretch across generations. The cultural scripts of childhood. In some societies, children are raised with the lesson that harmony is everything. Japan, for instance, has long prized group membership. Children quickly learn not to stand out, not to disrupt the collective flow. The nervous system absorbs the message. Safety comes from fitting in. In contrast, the United States often champions individuality. From an early age, children are taught to speak up, find your voice, be a leader. Here, the nervous system encodes a different lesson. Safety comes from visibility and assertion. Neither script is inherently right or wrong. Both shape bodies, choices, and futures. A Japanese child may feel the cost of suppressing uniqueness. An American child may feel the pressure of constant performance. Culture conditions the nervous system just as surely as family does. Both philosophy and the child philosophers have long grappled with the question of freedom in the face of conditioning. Jean-Jacques Rousseau believed that civilization corrupts the natural goodness of the child. His vision was of childhood as pure, with society pressing conformity like a mould. John Locke saw the child as a tabula rasa, a blank slate. For him, conditioning was writing itself into the empty page, for better or worse. Michel Foucault, centuries later, argued that schools are not just places of learning, but machines of discipline, rows of desks, timed bells, surveillance, and report cards teaching children to regulate themselves. Conditioning here is not an accident, it is design. Through these lenses, childhood conditioning is not simply accidental, it is philosophical architecture. It reflects what societies believe about human nature, power, and control. The spiritual lens, spiritual traditions also carry their own philosophies of conditioning. In Buddhism, the cycle of samsara, endless birth, suffering, and rebirth, can be read as a metaphor for trauma loops. Children inherit the unhealed pain of parents, society, and history, replaying them until compassion interrupts the cycle. In many indigenous cultures, children who sense or feel differently are honored as visionaries. Sensitivity is not pathologized but celebrated as a gift to the community. Compare this to Western psychiatry, which often turns the same sensitivities into disorders. Mystical traditions go further, suggesting that conditioning is not just family or culture but illusion, a veil that hides deeper truths of self and spirit. To awaken is to see through the conditioning, to remember the self beneath. In my own journey, I've seen how these cultural and philosophical frames shaped me. I grew up in a world that prized compliance, quietness, external approval, promoted cutthroat, dog-eat-dog competition, and individualism. My meltdowns, frustrations, and silence were not seen as survival, but as defiance. Later, when I sought diagnosis, I realized how much of that search was for external recognition. I wanted others to name my difference so I could be accepted. But over time, I saw that what I really needed was self-validation, to step outside of cultural scripts of conformity, pathology, and performance, and to say, this is who I am, this is enough. That realization was not only personal, it was philosophical. It meant rejecting the script of external power and reclaiming the truth of inner authority. Childhood conditioning is never neutral. It is written by families, by cultures, by philosophies, by systems of power. Some cultures shape children toward harmony, others toward performance. Some philosophers see children as pure, others as empty, still others as raw material for discipline. Spiritual traditions see conditioning as illusion, suffering, or initiation. To see conditioning this way is to recognize that no child grows up in isolation. Every nervous system is embedded in a worldview, every behavior is framed by philosophy, every survival strategy reflects a cultural script. And for those of us who felt different, who carried sensitivities too heavy for the world around us, part of healing is recognizing this larger context. We are not just responding to parents or teachers, we are responding to entire systems of thought and power. We'll now return to the personal, looking at how my own anger, shutdowns, and mistrust pulled me back into childhood states, and how those loops, once recognized, became opportunities for healing rather than prisons of repetition. Because childhood conditioning is not only cultural or philosophical, it is alive, it is remembered in the body, and the body never forgets. Personal reflections, my loops in time. When I look back at my life, what strikes me most is not just the big events, but the way the body carried them forward, looping them into the present. Trauma does not move on just because time does. It lingers in the nervous system, replaying itself in new contexts, whispering the same old warnings. For me, anger was one of the first loops. As a child, I wasn't naturally explosive. If anything, I wanted calm. But when demands stacked, when expectations piled on top of sensory overload, when no one saw or heard what I was struggling with, the pressure built until there was no choice but release. A slammed door, raised voice, storming out of the room. To adults, it looked like defiance, being uncooperative. But inside, it was the body saying, enough. The hardest part wasn't the anger itself. It was what came after, the crash. The days of exhaustion, self-soothing alone, because compassion rarely followed. Adults remembered the outburst, not the build-up. They judged the storm, but ignored the weather system that caused it. In those moments, I learned double punishment. First, for the meltdown itself. Second, for being misunderstood. Later, those loops repeated in subtler ways. I would sense tension in a room before words were spoken. I'd shut down in conversations when I felt unheard. I'd mistrust praise because I'd learned how fragile approval could be. My body responded as though I was still a child, still waiting for safety that never quite came. Diagnosis gave some explanation, but it didn't untie the knots. It took years of reflection, writing, and spiritual work to see the patterns clearly. In My Inner Child Was Broken, I described the selective mutism, the shutdowns, the meltdowns. But what mattered more than the behaviours was the nervous system underneath, a system conditioned into fear, silence, and self-blame. Even as an adult, I carried those scripts. In relationships, I sometimes found myself freezing instead of speaking, being shy, fawning instead of setting boundaries, or erupting when the pressure became unbearable. These weren't choices, they were echoes, trauma loops disguised as personality. The turning point came when I began to witness them with compassion instead of judgment, to see the anger not as proof of being broken, but as survival energy, long trapped and finally spilling out, to see shutdown not as weakness but as protection, to see mistrust not as paranoia but as a lesson carved by real experiences. This shift wasn't about excusing everything. I am not perfect. I've seen my own shadow behaviours, moments where pain turned into sharp words or mistrust coloured my perception. But recognizing the loops gave me a chance to respond differently, to pause, to breathe, to tell my body this was then, not now. Healing didn't mean erasing the loops. It meant loosening their grip. It meant finding compassion for the child I was, the adult I became, and the nervous system that has carried me through it all. And as I deepened this journey, I realized something else. My healing doesn't stop with me. Because of mirror neurons. Because of the way we unconsciously reflect and resonate with one another. When I choose compassion for myself, it ripples outward. It softens the way I show up in relationships. It creates space for others to do the same. That's why I speak so openly now in this series and in my books. Not because I want pity, and not because I claim sainthood, but because telling the truth about loops, meltdowns, shutdowns, mistrust, about the body's way of remembering, gives others permission to name their own. Childhood conditioning is not something you simply outgrow. It lives in the body until it is met. But it is not a life sentence. With awareness, compassion, and practice, the loops loosen. The nervous system learns that now really is not then. And from that place, a different future becomes possible. Breaking the script childhood conditioning leaves deep imprints. Nervous systems shaped by punishment, neglect, or even well-intentioned control carry those scripts forward into adulthood. But here's the essential truth. Scripts are not destiny. The body remembers, yes, but the body can also relearn. Breaking the script begins with awareness. To notice the moment your body reacts not to the present, but to the past. To catch the tension in your shoulders when someone raises their voice, the freeze when conflict emerges, the fawn when approval feels at stake. These are not failures, they are signals. They are the body whispering, this is familiar. Therapy helps put words to these signals. In trauma-informed approaches, the goal is not to erase memory, but to reconnect with the nervous system safely. Somatic experiencing, EMDR, internal family systems. All these methods work not by suppressing the body's truth, but by honoring it, giving space for trapped energy to move, and allowing the self to meet what once felt unbearable. Spiritual growth takes this a step further. Awareness becomes not just about survival, but transformation. When you see that anger is not only rage, but also fire, energy that can protect, inspire, you begin to shift the script. When you recognize that shutdown is not only collapse, but also stillness, a chance to rest, reset, and listen, you reclaim agency. The same nervous system patterns that once imprisoned you can become resources when reframed with compassion and practice. And then comes rewriting. Journaling your triggers to map patterns. Practicing grounding techniques to remind your body, now is not then. Learning to pause between impulse and action. Creating rituals that anchor you in safety. Building relationships where authenticity, not masking, is valued. I know this because I've lived it. For years, I carried scripts of silence, anger, mistrust. They shaped my relationships, my choices, my self-image. But through self-reflection, therapy, and spiritual practice, I began to see them as scripts, not truths. And once you see a script, you gain the power to edit it. Rewriting doesn't mean erasing the past. It means honoring it while refusing to be defined by it. It means telling the child within, I see you, I hear you, and I will not abandon you again. It means building a future not by denying the body's history, but by teaching it a new way forward. Breaking the script is not easy. It is not quick, but it is possible. And every step, every pause, every breath, every act of compassion toward yourself is proof that the past does not own you. So as we come to the end of this podcast, we've traveled a long way in this episode. From attachment and punishment, to neurodivergence, to philosophy, to the loops of anger, shutdown, and mistrust, we've seen how childhood conditioning wires itself into the nervous system. We've seen how scripts of silence, compliance, and performance carry forward into adulthood. And we've seen that while the body remembers, it can also relearn. The key is awareness, compassion, and courage to meet the signals without judgment, to recognize the loops without shame, and to gently rewrite the scripts into something truer, kinder, freer. And this brings us to the next episode, because while conditioning shapes behavior, it also shapes memory. The body carries stories that words often fail to capture. In episode 15, The Body Remembers What Words Forget, we'll explore why trauma survivors often remember through sensation more than language, weaving Bessel van der Kolk's work The Body Keeps the Score with alternative perspectives. We'll look at trembling hands, gut churns, and silent tears, the body's way of remembering what words cannot say. You've been listening to The Body Knows. Until then, thank you for listening. Thank you for walking this path with me. I hope this episode offered not just insight but compassion for yourself, for others, and for the child within who still longs to be seen. James Miller.